welcome to the Undercut podcast. I'm your host, Ellie-May Taylor, and we're back to preview this weekend's Las Vegas Grand Prix. Joining me as ever are the showgirls to my feathered headdress, Jessie Billington and Thiemo Albers Daly. How are you both?
Not too bad. I'm in a weird way looking forward to this one. I'll get onto my reasons and theory behind it, but I think I'm just going to try and get in the Vegas spirit of things. I'm going to be upbeat. I'm happy. I've had a good week so far. I've just had a second roll of film back from the developers and all looks good there. Work has finally started to sort of wind down for the winter season, so stress levels are gone. I'm in the right headspace to enjoy the Vegas Grand Prix and the chaos that it will surely bring. Thiemo, how are you?
I'm excellent, and like you, not really sure what to expect with this weekend in much the same way that I don't think anyone really does, and my bar is just going to be extremely low and just go in with an open mind and just see what happens, because it could just be absolute chaos. It could be incredibly boring because they've put up such high hype for it now, or it could genuinely be the best thing we've ever seen, although I will be very surprised if that happens, but we really don't know, but I'm going with an open mind.
I'll be very disappointed if these three things don't happen this weekend, because if we're going to race in Vegas, we may as well go all out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, I would like an Elvis impersonator to sing the US national anthem.
Wrong. We've got...
Is that not just Daniel Ricciardo?
I mean, I welcome that.
Fairly certain it's Donny Osmond.
Is it Donny Osmond?
I think it's Donny Osmond.
He comes into my plan later on.
Why do you have plans concerning Donny Osmond? That's the scary part.
I don't want to ask those kind of questions.
We'll get onto it later. Anyway.
That's the R-rated version that you can get on Patreon.
Yeah. Following the national anthem, I would like Shania Twain. I think she still has residency in Las Vegas. I know she used to. But anyway.
She still does.
I think so. I mean, she takes a horse onto stage, so she'll fit really well in with Danny Rick. But anyway, I think we should have an amalgamation of her greatest hits, but the lyrics are changed. So, Man, I Feel Like a Woman starts off with Let's Go Drivers, followed by, don't impress me much, but she just goes up to Christian Horner and she's like, so you've got an RB19? That don't impress me much. The second thing is, you know when you've won the lottery and you get those huge checks?
Mm.
Well, it happens often to me, yes.
I think the winner of the Grand Prix should get a huge ticket presented to them with unlimited access to any Las Vegas performance for life.
You know what? I'm not against the third idea. I think that would be kind of handy. I think that's a good motivation to win the Vegas GP, is because you really, really, really want to see Shania Twain when she returns to Vegas in 2024 for a third residency. She's not there currently, annoyingly. So it'd have to be like a special performance, like a one night only in Vegas. Shania Twain publicly embarrasses Christian Horner.
I think we should do that. And the third thing is, I've joined her in this. I think that those that are currently have residency in Las Vegas, I think they should actually be the ones to give the trophies when the drivers get a podium. So people like Donny Osmond, Kylie Minogue, I'm pretty sure she has a residency at the minute in the US.
She does.
Why is that Shania Twain? But maybe you too? Because they're in the sphere, aren't they?
Yeah. I think it'd be...
But how amazing would it be?
I think there should be like a row of... Well, no, okay, so we can't have grid girls, but we can have grid Elvises. So that's the first change that obviously needs to be in place for Vegas. And equally, like usually there's just like some person holding the trophy for like the official to come and get. That should also be an Elvis. Then obviously whoever's in residency can then hand out the trophies. I hate to say this, but I think you've had some good ideas.
I think I have.
It's Vegas. Anything is likely to happen, I think is the take home from this.
Anyway, I would say that we're going back to some normality now into moving into what the hell has happened, but we won't just be covering the Las Vegas Strip this podcast. In fact, we're starting off this segment with some uncovering, as Valtteri Bottas has stripped off his clothes to bare his Bottas, as he has just released a 2024 calendar, which, including the cover, I think you get 13 bare-cheek Bottas photos for £18, which I thought was reasonably priced. Unsure what it is in other currencies, but $5 from each calendar sale will be given to prostate cancer research and other Movember-supported charities. And I think the mustache is included too when his face features.
I could go for a Bottas calendar.
I think £18 not too bad.
It's not an extortionate amount, especially when you factor in that 5 of that does go to charity. So, I mean, yeah.
I also think it's the perfect present to buy someone for someone you know who isn't particularly well versed in Formula One knowledge and doesn't know who Valtteri Bottas is.
Yeah, to them it's just a Finnish man in the middle of Colorado, wasn't it, with his junk out? Like,
open this in front of your family. Who is this man? I don't know. I swear. Why is your friend giving this to you? I don't know. I'm so confused. This is Christmas morning. It's all very weird.
It's a perfect joke gift because also it comes with that added charitable edge, so you don't feel too bad about subjecting people who've never seen Formula One in their life to the image of Bottas's pure white ass.
If you look on the website, all the pictures are blurred out. You can see...
Surprise!
Yeah, you can see January, February, and March, I think, on his own Instagram account. But I don't think, for many reasons, you're not allowed to put them on the website.
Ellie-May's looked hard and long to try and see if there is a way to find out.
Yeah, because can you imagine the sheer surprise when you turn over to May and it's just a frontal shot of his junk and you're like, oh, wow, that's wasn't expecting that one. Possibly.
Or the team-ups with other drivers he's done for later in the year that you're not expecting.
That poses the dangerous question of which other drivers do you think would do a nude photo shoot for a charity calendar?
Definitely Ricardo after that. It gets tricky.
Yeah, Sainz, I reckon we could see Sainz doing it. He goes in for that sort of a thirst trap style shot. So he'd
be full frontal, but with some strategically placed garden ornaments.
Yeah.
Kevin
and Hulk, I think, would do it.
Yeah, I reckon you could trick Charles into doing it. Like how
he's probably sitting at a piano, bare ass naked, but you can't see anything.
Charles would be very tasteful. I think that's the
with
thing.
A rose in his mouth.
It'd be quite artistic.
Alonso would do it.
Oh,
Alonso would do it just for the giggles. I think George would be in for one as well.
He does like to be topless, so just turn him around.
There's not a lot left to take away, is there, really? Yeah, there's not much left to the imagination as begins with George.
I think it pretty much said at least half the grid will do it, which means you've got a calendar there pretty much.
Which means there's technically one photo of them where they're all arm in arm, but naked of each other. So you can make sure they all get in the photo.
Just guess the driver by the rear.
Piastri.
Yeah, they're all standing side by side, but you don't know who's who, and that's part of the mystery.
Piastri, I reckon, is a wild card, but he'd definitely do one.
Yeah, I feel like Lando might be a bit too awkward, but at the same time, once you got him to do it, he'd enjoy it.
No, I don't think Lando would ever do it. He'd sit on the sidelines chuckling and he'd hold Oscar's jumper while Oscar sort of takes his tap.
I'm glad you said jumper there. You started off with a J and I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Yeah, my brain was hovering between junk and kit, and I went for jumper in the end. I thought that'd be the more sanguine one. Albon, I don't think would. I strangely reckon Logan Sargent would, though, because Florida man, they do weird stuff.
Be draped in an American flag.
Yeah. Again, tasteful. Don't think...
Gasly. How have we forgotten Gasly? He definitely would.
Yeah. It's French and weird. Of course he's going to do it. Ocon, I don't think so, but Gasly, yes.
Does Ocon have a rear to do it?
He's pretty trim.
That's up to you to judge, Ellie-May.
He is a flat-arsed gentleman. He is. Perhaps that's why Elena Berry left him. She just couldn't stand the sight of a man with no ass. We'll never know. Unless we have her on the podcast as a guest. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked. Alex Albon's 24 Hours of Daytona proposal has fallen through. This is something that had been sort of floated around in the automotive racing sphere for a while. But he was aiming to run in the endurance race with Andretti at Wayne Taylor Racing. Williams were also on board with the idea, but it seems that logistics and timings just aren't playing ball, along with a series of other undisclosed issues. So it's a bit of a shame, but I know that there was a long period of time where everyone was like, oh, who's it going to be that's doing a 24 Hours of Daytona? Who is it that sort of could be lining themselves up to try and do the Triple Crown if they sort of get themselves under the table with WEC stuff and then do a bit of IndyCar? Turns out it was Alex, and unfortunately it's fallen through. But Do you reckon we'll see him make another bid to do some endurance racing?
Maybe not.
Not anytime soon.
Yeah, not whilst the calendar is so
chocker.
Yeah, I think that's a bit difficult to. If he wants to do it properly, I think it would be hard to sort of try and get that practice in to then be quite successful at it. It's not. I don't think it's just a case of turning up to your first test
and
then
just sort of
first practice. And then, yeah, although Tom Christensen basically did that, didn't he, and won Le Mans? So on his first go, so
it's doable. Certainly is doable. Speaking of endurance racing, WEC LMP2 driver Doriane Pin is reportedly in talks for a FRECA seat and an F1 Academy seat for next year. Formula One Academy are reportedly very interested in having her join the category. It is worth remembering at this point, though, that talks do not equal contracts. The 19-year-old French driver has close ties with Kremer, who run in the F1 Academy series, and took Marta Garcia to the inaugural title this year. They also have a team in FRECA, and bear in mind that also Pin is a very talented driver, but hugely underrated and very rarely mentioned on the scene. She came fifth in the 2021 Le Mans Cup with Iron Lynx and won the Ferrari Challenge Europe Series last year, taking 9 wins across the 14 rounds, as well as coming ninth in this year's World Endurance Championship in only her first year in the LMP2 class. Last year, she won the 24 Hours of Spa with Iron Dames. She is a blisteringly fast driver and hugely competitive with real skill behind the wheel. Should she come into Formula One Academy or indeed FRECA, it'll be her first time in an open wheel single-seater since karting. But with that track record behind her, I reckon there's a very real shout we'll see her in one of those series this year, if not possibly both, and some interesting impacts in the world of getting sort of women into sort of major league single-seaters moving forwards.
Her results speak for themselves. She's got talent and she's quick, and if she can get a seat in either FRECA or F1 Academy, I think for me the most interesting thing would be to see if she can transfer those skills into single-seater racing and also see what she prefers herself to. Because I know when we interviewed Abby Eating at Donington this year, she said she actually preferred closed cockpit racing as you can push a lot harder than single-seater racing. So I think that would be quite interesting as well to see her preferences.
She has had Daniel Kvyat as well as sort of one of her mentors through this season. I know he's been attached to the Premier Racing program in WEC. So it's not like she's coming into this with sort of bad guidance and bad judgment. Daniel Kvyat, on a good day, was a very fast F1 driver, worth remembering, and equally brings with him a lot of knowledge and experience of how to get by in the world of F1. He certainly didn't have a fun time of things, so he knows the rougher side of things and could be a good advisor as well and a good contact. And from their sort of social feeds, they at least seem to get on well. So it's practical on that side.
Essentially going to echo what you were going to say there, Ellie-May, with the background that she has. It's going to be interesting to see if she can transfer her speed and ability in endurance racing over to single-seaters, especially after such a long time kind of in this form of racing now, as opposed to a single-seater. And that's why the other news is also quite interesting in that perspective from another racing series jumping across, in that Lia Block is signing with Williams to drive an F1 Academy in 2024 with ART, because obviously she's got a rally background and is more off-road and all these kind of things. Driving in Nitrocross this year, she's done a number of rallies all over the place. And it's an interesting choice. It's not one I saw coming. I'm going to be very kind of fascinated to see how she does, and if Doriane gets in as well, how she does. But it does also beg the question of, there are surely other young women who have purely focused on single-seaters throughout their career so far, and are they missing out next year in place of these drivers because they're more well-known? And is that F1 and F1 Academy just trying to get more well-known figures into the sport so that they can boost the image of it? And then maybe in 2025 it goes back to some lesser-known names because there's going to be more attention on it. Because it's just, whilst I'm intrigued to see what Lia Block can do, you've got to think that these drivers are coming in with at least the plan to get into F3 or F2, because obviously F1 is the ultimate thing, but not everyone's going to make that, and we have that already with the F2 and F3 drivers. So it's just, I'm not saying that those who wouldn't necessarily make it to F1 anyway shouldn't be in this, but it's just an interesting left field choice, and it's just a curious thought experiment there, I think. And who else could be there that maybe would be better suited single-seaters when Lia and Doriane haven't really got that much experience there? I mean, we've already seen it this year with a couple of drivers having more experience elsewhere come in and race there and do okay. But it's just, it's just interesting.
I think a lot of the drivers, certainly from this season, that came into F1 Academy had either done Formula 4 or FRECA, or they'd done W Series prior to that. So they sort of came into it with experience in single seaters. But equally, F1 is regarded by a lot of people as like the pinnacle of motorsport. I think if an opportunity comes along where you can sort of take a good stab at getting onto that ladder, I think if you're any racing
for sure.
driver,
I mean, I
can
see why they would have gone for it themselves. It's just, again, it's when you see how hard fought the single-seater categories are for normally, when it's purely single-seater background, when you start adding more drivers from other backgrounds into the mix, it then becomes that much more competitive, and it's just going to be interesting to see how that works into things next year. And then the following years after that, do we get more of a free-for-all from all racing backgrounds, or does it then stem back to just more focus on drivers that have had that single-seater experience, like you were saying, the majority of drivers had this year?
I think the variety of backgrounds, though, is good, because equally the one thing you want in motorsport is that variety.
You will then test them out a good bit.
Yeah, and equally you want the variety of people that a variety of racing backgrounds brings with it. I think that's a crucial thing. We talk about sort of expanding the diversity of the sport, and if you were to say we're only selecting from single-seater racing, you sort of rule out things like people coming from Brazilian touring car. You rule out people coming from certain sort of racing sects where there isn't necessarily a grassroots open cockpit style of racing, but sort of having that broader scope does at least give a bit more possibility. I don't think it's hard to say early on whether or not it's going to achieve anything when it comes to that sort of diversity of people, but ultimately, if you're opening it up, your doors as far
it's just
wide.
Interesting.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think if they're showing that they're throwing out the doors as far wide as possible, at the end of the day, with so few female racing drivers on the major scene, gathering together some of the best and putting together a showcase to prove that yes, this girl can, and equally look at this fantastic talent. I think that is ultimately going to be part of the end game of F1 Academy, is going, see, I don't know what you're moaning about. There are very talented women out there. You just have to sometimes look a bit laterally to find them. And often because they themselves are to look laterally to get a racing seat.
I think the last thing I'll say on that is just that I'm all for this. I'm going to find it very interesting to see, because it's going to be, again, ideally find drivers with all completely different backgrounds and see how they'll get on single seaters, because that's just a fun experiment that you don't get to do all that often. I think the only other thing for me is that obviously Lia and Doriane are very well known in the motorsport community already, and I think that's where it comes into it. They're both very talented, and I think that's why it's still okay at the moment. But you don't want to then stray into that territory of a well-known female racing driver who is then getting that seat purely for the brand recognition rather than the talent that they might have. And I don't think we're there yet with any of the drivers where they've been able to get that, because of how sparse on the opportunities there have been so far. But you then just don't want it to turn into, this driver is going to get in just because of the name or the fact that they're popular over the talent, because we see that in F1 all the time in terms of drivers just buying their way in. And whilst it's not happening here, obviously, it's just you don't want to stray into that territory when you've got a new racing series.
I guess I'm almost sort of echoing what Jesse said, and I think what you've touched on a little bit as well, Thiemo, is that I think because it's been so hard for women to get into single-seater racing, they've gone down different avenues. So you are going to have more of a broader, you're going to have to look more broader at other racing series to then, and I guess allow them to give them the opportunity that they've never been given.
Yeah. And that's something that's going to be worked out over time as they figure out what works and what doesn't.
We'll see how it progresses as things move on. But speaking of junior series, Oliver Goethe has joined the Red Bull junior team. The 19-year-old competed in Formula 3 this year with Trident and has finished 8th. His 2024 plan is currently open, with there being plenty of spaces in Formula 3 and Formula 2 still to grab. Do you reckon we'll see him stick around in F3, or is that move up a rank something that we can see on his plate?
It's very hard to predict at the moment, to be honest, because the F2 grid is a bit all over the place at the moment with the drivers that we've had confirmed. There's been a lot of jumps of people that you wouldn't necessarily expect to jump in there. So it's definitely still to grab. Whether or not it's a good idea is another matter entirely, but at least he's got an all right track record this year in Formula 3. So, and again, we've been proven completely wrong before with drivers jumping from F3 to F2, where we've thought they'd be completely unprepared, and they've turned out to be pretty damn good. So it's like Vegas this weekend. Anything could happen.
I think there's scope for something interesting there. What's
the average age of a Formula 3 or Formula 2 driver?
It's younger every year, it feels like at the moment.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because I believe is he Red Bull's youngest junior driver? And he's 19.
They must have a younger one in there. But then again, they've been chopping a few lately, so I would need to check.
Formula 3, I think the youngest in there is about sort of 18. I think Christian Mansell, when he started this season, and Hugh Barton were both about 18. They're born in 2005, which is a scary concept. But then equally, you've got to bear in mind that you've got the likes of Sophia Flörsch, Ido Cohen, I don't know who else is about there. They're both 22, and you've got some that are about 19. So I'd say your average age is about the 19 mark once you start sort of factoring it all in. And so, 19 is about your average age for F3. I don't know. I think for F2, it's about 2021. So a little older still, but yeah.
I think it's just kind of interesting because obviously we look back a few years ago and we had so many young drivers coming into F1 that it's almost now it's almost in a way going to have to now be the opposite, in that because now we've had so many young drivers and they're all very talented, they're probably going to remain in F1 for a long time, which means we're kind of seeing that maybe F2 and F3 are getting a bit older again.
Yeah, we've got a longer time to wait for those F1 seats to become available because you've naturally got this young bloodstock sitting in it, and they've got essentially looking at certainly at Alonso sort of proving that you can still do this right into your 40s, and certainly the likes of Hamilton, Perez proving that you can do this well into your 30s. There's this sort of idea that essentially you've got at least another 10 years of the likes of Norris, Russell, Leclerc and Albon still kicking around for a good while longer. I mean, Gasly's a year older than I am. I think so's Ocon, and they're still exactly fairly young by the measure of the rest of the field. So there's, essentially you've got a very long-lived F1 grid, and really going to see an age build up in F2 and F3, or simply these drivers sort of having to look at other options. But a Formula 3 guide to Barcelona in 2021 pegged the average age at 18.6 on the grid. So relatively young. I think there's still time for them to sort of stand a chance, but even if you allowed for like another 6 years of racing for some of the most median age drivers on the F1 grid, that would put them somewhere in the region of 24 by the time they join F1.
In other news, though, Andretti's F1 bid has been somewhat bolstered further by Cadillac's engine commitment, because GM will be building a Cadillac badge engine after registering as a power unit manufacturer for 2028. It's been a little while since we've had some more concrete Andretti news rather than just the whole thing, why is this taking so long? And this is quite good news, and it's going to kind of make Alpine have to get along with making better engines because, well, they need to for themselves, if nothing else. But it's good news for Andretti, and just makes you think, what else do they and the whole of that kind of team have to do to convince F1 to just give them the final approval to come into Formula One?
Were Andretti planning on joining in 2025, or have I just made that?
They say they want to be in 25, but I think realistically it'll be 26. I think they want to do 25 just to get everything bedded in, so go through the motions essentially, not expect to be doing very much, and then make full use of the 26 regulations.
I think it's interesting then that Cadillac want to perhaps be joining in 2028, because then will there be a contract between Andretti and Cadillac from 2028? What happens in those years that they aren't there? I think that seems quite risky.
Well, I think that's where the Alpine question comes in there, is maybe have a pre-contract as such for 28, and they can opt to use it or opt to not, and then it's up to Alpine to make a better engine if they want to keep Andretti as customers for after 2028. And then you've got a 2-year thing to decide if this is what you want, if it's working, and if not, then you can go for a relatively soft reboot with Cadillac in 28. And in theory, Cadillac then could potentially supply other teams and maybe would do Haas if they've still not got any better by then?
It will be, I think the Alpine argument stems more on the grounds of either make better engines and we could be your customer. Equally, if Cadillac come in and out of the box start making better engines than Alpine, then there's major question. I say Alpine, it's Renault that make the engines over at their Vimy plant, but it's not necessarily a case of someone pressuring Renault to make better engines because they want them, but more a case of Renault all of a sudden not making the best engine on the grid and being usurped by the new boy. So there's a lot of questions still to be asked of it, and the staggering of Cadillac arriving, who will supply them with an engine for 25, 26, 27 before they arrive in 28 is open to sort of be understood at a later point in time. But yeah, it's unlikely they'll go for the Ford power unit that will be found in the back of the Red Bulls because, of course, GM Ford, not bedfellows in the slightest. In other news, Haas have had their bid to change the United States Grand Prix result dismissed. The FIA ultimately rejected Haas's request as evidence submitted was already available to the stewards at the time of the race, and the evidence therefore just wasn't new. It was also noted that stewards weren't able to accurately or consistently penalise drivers at turn 6 around COTA due to the poor positioning of the CCTV camera that managed the apex there, as it simply did not cover the apex of the corner. So this was a bit of a flub on the part of COTA for not setting things up properly. The FIA did add that further solutions to track limits and the monitoring of them should be found before the start of 2024 in conjunction with the circuits where it's very much relevant. So we're talking like COTA, we're talking Austria as well. So there's a lot of circuits where staying within the white lines has become more and more prevalent as the years roll past. So despite Haas's protestations, the evidence wasn't clear enough and was already evidence that the FIA and the stewards had seen. So net result, no change to those results. And equally, it does beg the question, while this was done as fast as possible across a triple header time span, should there be a cap on how far back you can go on changing race results? See the 2008 season.
Do you mean 2008 season as in Massa trying to change the championship?
Yes, yeah, due to a couple of instances where he feels that other drivers might have been penalised or viewed differently. I
think maybe teams should have the right to review the last race they've run at, but after that, I think it sets a messy precedent, which the FIA are ultimately not going to want to deal with, because how far are you going to let people go? You know, just said 2008, but if we start looking into that, is Damon Hill going to turn around and ask for the 1994 championship to be reviewed? I don't think he would, but I think it becomes, the sort of point is it becomes messy, and without, I guess, sounding like an inspirational post, Haas just need to stop thinking about the past and stop focusing on the future. I might actually start sending the Haas some inspirational quotes about looking towards the future.
Send them like a really nice graphic that says the windscreen is bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason. Yeah, I think it's an interesting
one. Yeah, it opens up a messy thing though, like you said, because where do you draw the line then? How far back do you go? And if that is something that is then doable, what is the point in going racing if someone's just going to say in a week, 2 weeks, 10 years time, oh, I didn't quite like that because life's not fair and I've decided that I'm not going to be happy about that now. Just deal with it. I mean, again, you could have 2021 looked at for all kinds of reasons and just that could go ping-ponging back and forth. But again, even then, if you ruled it a different way, what's to stop a counter thing then? And how many ways does that go? And it just becomes a bit silly. And we don't need any more of that when it comes to FIA and rulings and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, I'll let you say it, one race after maybe. But if you're going to present something to the FIA, at least have new evidence. Don't just show them what they've already seen as well. Just be smarter about it. And, yeah, get on with it.
It's a very Haas thing to go to the stewards and show the stewards what they already know, thinking you've sort of got new evidence, going, look what I found. No, we've seen that already, mate. It's nothing new. It's such a Haas move. Anyway, moving on from Haas to McLaren, who are reportedly in talks to extend Lando Norris's contract. Currently, he's signed with the Woking team until 2025, but they are eager to sign an extension with Norris. Do we think he'll go for it?
At the moment, I don't see why not. I mean, McLaren potentially have a championship winning car for next year, so you'd want to be sticking around for that.
Yeah, I think certainly with the form that we've seen from McLaren over the past season and sort of in glimmers in seasons prior, they've finally found a form and are working well. And it's yeah, I don't think if you're Norris, you'd back away from it, even if Audi come through with a very tempting proposition to go and join what was Sauber. So we'll have to see what happens with that one. But I think possibly he'll stick around with McLaren if he thinks Sauber is a place worth going to. He might at least give Sauber a season or two under Audi's leadership to sort of get themselves under the table and sorted. Because remember, that's still something that's happening. Reportedly, we've seen some graphics released recently with Audi liveries on 2024 spec cars. So very interesting stuff there. Speaking of different spec cars, AlphaTauri's new pace is likely down to just using Red Bull parts. Since the Singapore Grand Prix, they've been using RB19 rear suspension elements, and these parts are well understood when it comes to their kinematics and mechanics, so might well have unlocked this additional pace. For Abu Dhabi, they're bringing a new floor, which sounds daft, but bear in mind that this will play into their 2024 car, and that there is young driver tests immediately post-season. They can gain even more data from it. We've heard for a while about the two teams sharing a lot more. Do we think this is going to be the start of things to come?
I think as long as they can get away with it, I think they'll keep on doing it if they're allowed, and they can, get around whatever it says in the regulations. Then I guess why not? If it's making your car better and you have the tools available for you to use, I don't see why not.
It's essentially being a less impressive version of Racing Point when they had a very close copy of another car, and they're kind of allowed to use the tools this time to make it up there. It's not just we were inspired by this other team. We're kind of actually working as close as within the rules as we can. And let's face it, any of the other teams, if they could do it, they probably would, and they already kind of do, because they all look at each other's stuff anyway to try and see what they can learn and adapt to their own cars. So whether or not they can keep it up is another thing, because just because you have, in theory, everything you need at your disposal doesn't then mean that you'll be able to translate that to performance and results on track. But it's looking good so far.
Yeah.
And again, this could all go tits up when 2026 comes around, because everyone could get buggered by the new regulations.
Yeah, it all depends how long that can last with new regulations on the horizon, but we'll wait and see what happens then. More closely on the horizon, though, is, of course, the Las Vegas Grand Prix. We've raced in Vegas twice before, 1981 and 1982, but we're coming back for something completely different. Gone is the Caesars Palace car park layout, which was about 2.5 miles long and actually fits on the infield to this year's Grand Prix circuit. But we don't really know how much of the racing is going to be interesting and so on and so forth. But the real question is, there's been a lot of interesting elements that have led up to this. It's being very Vegas-y. We've got a Chapel Love in the paddock. We're going to have driver introductions back, akin to how we saw in Miami. There's, of course, the giant sphere. And I think every team bar Mercedes has a special livery for this race. Are there any liveries that have stood out to the two of you?
Not even one. They all look terrible to me. They still look very Vegas-y in terms of, I appreciate you've got to maybe do something because it's Vegas, but I'm quite glad none of them are the permanent liveries for the car, and they all just look a little bit tacky. I'm suspecting Ellie-May may disagree with me.
I will always like a red and white Ferrari. I always welcome the white back. But other than that, I don't think I'm particularly fussed about any of the other liveries. I thought
Alpine's looks exactly the same.
It's just sort of textured a bit in places.
Red Bull, I mean, their livery's not all that different. It's sort of just got like a little playing cards on it. But
I said, just looks like they got some stickers and just stuck them on the side.
Yeah, but they did their livery reveal in a nightclub, didn't they?
Yeah, they lowered it from the ceiling amidst ladies on spinning ropes and all sorts. Was quite the spectacle.
I think that I have sat in a car that's done a Las Vegas Grand Prix before a lot of the drivers
were even born.
No, not even were born. I've sat in an F1 car that's done the last, obviously would have been Caesars Palace Grand Prix. or potentially.
You're thinking back to that Arrows.
Yes.
What year was the Arrows? Was it A5?
Arrows A4.
I can't remember if the Arrows A4. What year? The Arrows A4 was
last
82.
Event,
yeah.
Last event, the Caesars Palace Grand Prix.
Yeah, so it would have been driven by Mario Baldi, and he came 11th. So not actually that terrible.
No.
Oh, well, there we go.
Now I have my little claim to fame.
Yeah. What happened to the other Arrows? I don't know if it was even entered.
I don't think it was.
I don't think it was, no. Yeah, interestingly, he qualified 24th. So, but bear in mind that quite a lot of cars didn't qualify. Some didn't start, and a lot retired. So that's something that's carried forward to this year's Grand Prix. That will be very interesting indeed. One of the things I do like, I will say my favourite livery, the Ferrari is pretty good, to be fair. I do quite like that. I think the Williams looks pretty pants. It looks pretty gauche. So for me, yeah, the Ferrari is the only good-looking livery out of the bunch. But equally, the curbstones have a special livery too. We're in Vegas, of course, it's known for its gambling. So the curbstones have been painted with the suits from a deck of cards. And I don't hate it. If we've got to have this goofy-ass race, I'm really glad we're leaning into making it quite goofy. And I think that if we're going to do one sort of stupid one, like when you're doing a set of photographs at a formal event and then you go, oh, let's do a silly one. For me, Vegas is going to be the silly one. And I think if we're going to do it and lean into it, I'm all the more for it. But obviously, there are some sort of more serious elements to lean into as well with Vegas. Of course, the chaos that is reportedly caused and all the construction and presence. Bear in mind that the roads, however, are still open. And on Thursday, the circuit opens to local traffic at 6 a.m. and stays open until 7 p.m. The daytime traffic is unimpeded. And a similar situation is in place on Friday too. Measures have been taken to avoid prolonged road closure in the area through the roadworks as well. Equally, if America wasn't so horrendously car-centric in its transport solutions, this wouldn't be an issue. Probably why we don't hear complaints from the likes of Monaco, Singapore, Baku, Canada, and Australia when they host street circuits, because either they're held in areas where they aren't in truly public areas, like parks, and also they just have other means of transport instead of driving. And equally, Formula E gets away with a lot of street circuits as well. I think this is just the people of Las Vegas being a bit grumpy about it all. You live in a tourist destination. Surely when tourists come to it, you're probably used to that by now, right?
Who hosts usually street circuits? Is it because I know that obviously with the Las Vegas Grand Prix, this is the first time that Liberty Media are having to promote the race. They've never done it with any other race.
You have a company that's set up to sort of run it and organize it, but I think promotion of it or covering of funds is typically done by the same company. So like Silverstone will receive, Silverstone itself has the British Grand Prix company, and that I believe covers the cost of buying the Grand Prix. But equally, some of that is, or in previous years, I believe, has been funded by the government. A lot of governments do fund having a Grand Prix because it seems great for tourism. So it's sort of swings and roundabouts, but I think with Las Vegas it's been done slightly differently because it's not going to be a permanent circuit by any measure of the word, and it's so new, and equally trying to prove that it works before anyone forms like a long-standing company. So I think F1 has taken a huge sort of load onto its shoulders for this one to try and make it work.
They've built a building, haven't they? I can't quite remember what it's for.
They've built the pit building. That's a permanent structure that's been built up sort of just off of the strip. That is the one permanent structure they've created for this. Everything else is temporary. So all the stands in the sort of forecourts of all the hotels are completely temporary and can be taken down, and everything reset to how it was prior. But the pit building, the garages, the paddock, the fan zone, that is all a new and permanent structure, obviously with the intention that they're going to be returning to Vegas in years to come. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I love the fact that it's got like the big F1 logo on it. The pit exit looks kind of suspect because it just sort of feeds you out onto the inside of turn one, a bit like a badly designed Zandvoort. It's...
Isn't the exit on the not the exit, the entrance into the pit lane as well on the racing line?
Yeah, a bit like Baku. It sort of comes in a bit before you sort of sweep out. It's going to be interesting to see how it's achieved across the weekend, but that's sort of still to come. I think crucially, they'll be keeping an eye on the weather as well. We've had a lot of chatter about how cold things are going to be coming up to the Vegas Grand Prix. People have been mentioning previous cold races. Well, according to the meteorological reports, Thursday we'll see a low of 11 degrees Celsius overnight, which isn't too bad. And with a dew point of 4 degrees Celsius, we aren't likely to see much of that being an issue here. We're not going to see sort of standing water forming overnight. Friday has passing showers through the afternoon and into the evening, but any nighttime sessions are set to be free from falling rain. Saturday, which is technically race day in the US, but for us here in the UK, it will be 6 a.m. on a Sunday, is seeing overnight lows of 10 degrees Celsius, but so not quite as cold as some early forecasts were predicting, which was 4 degrees Celsius, which is actually colder than the current record for a low of 5 at the 1978 Canadian Grand Prix. Interestingly, Canada 78 was the final race of the season, held on the 8th of October, and was home hero Gilles Villeneuve's maiden win, and the first Canadian Grand Prix held at the circuit. Interestingly, much like Vegas, both championships were already sewn up in favour of Andretti and Lotus, so this, the final round, was dead rubber in the 1978 title chase. There are some brilliant shots of the drivers on the podium in puffy winter jackets as well, so it's worth looking back for the brilliant 70s fashion and aesthetics. But more recently, the last cold race I think we had was the 2020 Eiffel Grand Prix, where the Nürburgring GP circuit saw a race day temperature of just 10 degrees Celsius. On the subject of cold temperatures, Paul Monahan, the chief engineer on Red Bull's pit wall, said the tyres are very much at the lower end of their operating range. So it's all very much to play for. And I haven't really written anything for the next section, which is usually which on-track battles we reckon you should look out for, because honestly, with this, I genuinely don't have a clue. My best gamble is...
That's all the cars versus the tyres and the track. That's the on-track battles. Never mind with each other. That comes later. They actually make it past turn one.
The more sensible argument would be that any teams that have previously struggled with tyre degradation could well stand a decent chance here, because they arguably put more load through their tyres than anyone else, and therefore can at least keep some heat in them and won't suffer too badly. So thinking Ferrari and Haas might stand a chance here. Teams that are famously gentle to their tyres, very much the Mercedes, somewhat the Red Bull, and maybe even the Williams, might find themselves skating on thin ice. However, that Williams is quick in a straight line, and it's like a 2.6 mile sort of straight from the far end of the strip right down past Bubba Grump Shrimp Company. So we'll see how that all pans out.
I've been trying to figure out the setups and how the cars will work in Las Vegas. Obviously, you've got little braking zones, and the cold weather is going to mean cold brakes, make it difficult to warm up the tyres. But it is good kind of mechanically, because nothing in theory is going to really heat up. I think the engine's going to like the sort of cold weather. And I also think the altitude's about 610 meters. Sao Paulo is about 760. Austria is 700. So it's not as high up, but it's close. But it's not close to sort of sea level either. So the turbocharger is going to have to work harder than it was sort of if it was a race at sea level, because obviously the air's thinner, and as the altitude increases, the turbocharger has to work harder to get obviously oxygen into the engine, and obviously the more the turbocharger has to work, the hotter it's going to get. But with the cold weather, they should in theory mean that they don't have to worry about that. But I'm also wondering whether they'll be able to try and, I don't know, somehow have sort of smaller brake ducts and air intake and whatnot to actually keep heat in. So that, will that also then mean, because if they can try and make them smaller, will the car then become more aerodynamically efficient when you take into account the altitude as well? Can they actually then put more downforce onto the car, which means the car will be quicker, but that might actually help with sort of the tyres and the brakes bit?
I think we're going to see an evolution of the sort of setup that would be run at Monza or Mexico, because we're going to go for that sort of big straight line speed. And certainly with Mexico, where the altitude comes into it, you're going to be sort of basically giving it a high wing angle. But of course, we've got a bit of altitude. We've got relatively cold air, which again affects the density, but not hugely. I think there's going to be some sort of essentially Monza version 2.0 setup that comes into this. Certainly when it comes to brake cooling, we're going to see teams running very blocked off ducts. So if you get a chance to watch any of the practice sessions, because they are at god-awful hours both in the US and in the UK, have a look and see what sort of blanking off plates you can see. Obviously, during pit stops or when the cars are up on the jacks in the garage and don't have wheels on, you can usually spot the sort of two cowls that sit just inboard of the cake tins, and often you can see how much of them are sort of blanked off. Some teams might go for the slightly more flexible idea of just using speed tape and sort of blocking off the holes gradually just with additional bits of tape to eventually find the right balancing point for both heat retention and brake cooling. And I think the same will possibly be utilised when it comes to things like engine cowls, where you've got the sort of ventilation down the flank of it. We might see teams making sort of bodywork changes through the weekend to try and get the best level of cooling going through those engines, just to deal with the potentially colder temperatures. But obviously with altitude, engines might be working harder, might be burning hotter. So it could balance out towards the end. It's going to be a lot of learning on the feet for teams and figuring out setups. So interesting come Sunday, or soon as essentially Parc Fermé closes or conditions get brought in with qualifying, who's come out on top there?
I'm glad you agree with me, because I have limited knowledge about engineering. So I was like, I hope this is correct. This is my theory anyway.
As a theory, it makes the right amount of sense. I think there's going to be certainly an evolution of a setup we're familiar with when it comes to providing down source, and equally a similar evolution of a setup when it comes to cooling, and somehow amalgamating the two to produce what teams are expecting to be a competitive setup. If it turns out to be or not has yet to be proven. Regardless of what we think when it comes to setup, we've obviously got our predictions to make, and we'll start with pole position, where it's 2-1 Lando Norris against Max Verstappen. Thiemo, you're the outlier, so why don't you start?
I don't think there's really an explanation, though. It's Max Verstappen. It's his to lose as it has been all season, so I might as well just stick with what it is there on that one. Yeah, new track, but it won't matter.
That's a fair answer. Ellie-May, why have you gone for Lando?
I don't think Red Bull have the fastest car anymore. Maybe, or especially maybe in qualifying. And I think McLaren might just have it with Lando Norris.
I'm going down a similar route. I think also the challenging conditions. Max is great in slippery, greasy, wet conditions, but I think Lando isn't too far off him when it comes to that pace. He's used to karting in the UK in winter conditions. Going to a slippery, unproven, unrubbered-in surface of Vegas in winter could prove to be very much his forte, and might offer up a good chance for him to turn out some decent quali times. However, when it comes to...
Lance Stroll ignore all of us now and just repeat a Turkey situation with the changing conditions there and just get pole position at Vegas? It would be a very Vegas thing for him to do.
Yeah, Turkey 2020, where he just sort of slaps it on pole and just goes, how about that then? I think...
And then does nothing.
Does absolutely nothing with that in the race. We'll see how it pans out. However, when it comes to the podium, we've all gone for something a little bit different, and we'll start again with Thiemo.
Well, as per tradition for this year, got to go with the result of the last race, although I kind of hope it isn't these three, because that would be a bit of a boring race, I think. But Verstappen, Norris, Alonso.
That's very true. Ellie-May, you've gone for 2/3 the same answer.
Yes, I've gone for Verstappen win, Norris second, Leclerc third. I've decided that basically there's just going to be carnage at the start. So it means that Lando, who has got pole, and Max Verstappen, who is in
P2
next to him, they'll get around the first corner fine. There'll be carnage behind them. Nobody's able to brake because everything's cold. Everyone crashes into each other. Everybody's out, which means Charles Leclerc, who started in the pits because they had to...
Because he boomed it in the outlet.
No, because they've had to give him new parts that are outside of the allotted allocation, means that he misses all of this and comes out behind Verstappen and Norris, and obviously by default has to be third because all the other teams are out.
It's a dull race we're going to have, though, if we've got 49 laps, 49 and three-quarter laps of 3 cars going around.
Yeah, one of them's a Ferrari.
I know it worked out for your prediction later, but bloody hell.
I mean, one of them's a Ferrari, so it's just a wager on how long it takes until the Ferrari breaks. And equally, I think there's a good element of thought that's gone into the idea of Ferrari in the penultimate race of the year having to go beyond their allocated pool of parts to try and at least get Charles to start a race at this point. So there's some logic to her madness. I'll give her that. Meanwhile, I've simply gone for Norris, Sainz, Albon. 3 drivers that have taken part in the golfing tournament that Netflix hosted that looked absolutely horrid. And yeah,
of course it did.
It was very gimmicky. They included like a bit from Squid Games where you couldn't make your shot, your opening drive, if the scary girl robot thing was facing you from Squid Games. It was all very strange.
Sainz broke his trophy as well.
Yeah, Sainz broke his trophy as well. I think it sort of slipped out of his hands.
Probably Lando's fault.
Quite possibly. But yeah, Norris to win, Sainz second, Albon third. I can somehow see him making it work of all things. Like the Williams will be able to go long on its tyres, even if it's not burning through them or producing any grip. He'll somehow sort of skate it around the circuit. And I reckon at some point this weekend, we will see a driver incredibly crossed up coming out of a corner, like full armfuls of Oppo, smearing tyres in some sort of Larry power slide. And that to me sounds like a very Sainz thing to do. So it's sort of very much his home territory there too. When it comes to fastest laps, again, it's a very different pool. Thiemo's gone for your usual Sainz until it happens. So there's no point asking about that. Ellie-May, the rather obvious choice of Max Verstappen.
Yeah, I looked at my podium and thought, well, if there's only 3 drivers out of those 3, who's going to be the fastest out of them? And I decided Verstappen.
You've really gone all in on this sort of 3 drivers thing. You've not sort of spread your bets across it.
No. I've gone, in the spirit of Vegas, I've gone all in. And also, it's a very slim chance that either of you will now be beating me. So,
I mathematically cannot. I don't think Thiemo can either. So, I mean, you might as well have some fun with it. I don't blame you. I, meanwhile, have gone for Tsunoda, fastest lap. Again, it could happen. They're putting more and more Red Bull parts onto the Alpha Tauri as the week
1 in 20 chance.
There's 1 in 20 chance.
And he has done it before.
Exactly. He's on form. We know he can do it. So, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Did you put Tsunoda for Brazil?
It's a good question. I feel like I might have done.
Yeah.
No, Brazil, I put Verstappen.
No.
And he didn't get it there. So,
I feel like I want to change my wild prediction now based off what Ellie-May's been doing, and in the spirit of Vegas, kind of a reverse Uno to what she's doing. So I might change my wild prediction to be pole is then. So this is the wild prediction. It'll be Piastri that gets pole. It'll be Perez, Piastri, and Sainz on the podium. Perez gets the fastest lap, and then 17 cars finish the Grand Prix.
Perez, Piastri, Stroll.
Not Stroll, Jesus.
Yeah, you said you were inverting your.
No, good. Yeah, but it's a Sainz, so it's the teammates.
Yeah.
Stroll is not Leclerc's teammate.
Oh, you're inverting Ellie-May's. I thought you were inverting your own.
No.
So you go Perez.
Good Lord, I'm not that silly. I want to get points.
Sainz as your podium.
Mm.
And then your fastest lap, you reckon, is going to be
Perez.
Okay.
And then 17 cars finish as the wild prediction. Because that is kind of wild, because it's Vegas, and if they're all going to crash like we assume.
So you're going for the negative of Ellie-May, basically.
See what?
Plus, I just want to see the look on her face. If that is right, then for all that she's got that close, it will annoy her a little bit.
In the mayhem, well, we've just caused a lot of mayhem. But also, imagine if one of us is correct. Like, imagine how much money we could make.
Yeah, but if we tried that next year, it won't work.
I'm almost tempted to put a bet on my podium.
Hang on.
But they have to be the only 3 cars to finish, otherwise that's not as ambitious a bet. Plus you'll get better odds.
Let me go find, where is Sky Bet? It's on here somewhere. There it is.
Just comes up with, "Are you crazy?"
Let's see what the Vegas GP. Here we go. Okay. So for outright winner of Perez, 22-1. I've gone for Norris as a winner, which is 8-1, and Thiebo's got Verstappen as 1-4. If you go for Piastri, it's a 40-1 win.
Go on then, just say what Sargent is, because he's going to be in the bottom of that. Let's face it.
Sargent shares odds with Danny Rick, Guan Yu Zhou, Kevin Magnussen, Lance Stroll, Nico Hülkenberg, Valtteri Bottas, and Yuki Tsunoda as a 500-1 win. Albon 300-1 to win, which puts him on par with just himself, actually. Both the Alpines share 200-1 odds. Alonso 50-1, Piastri, as we mentioned, 40-1, Russell 33-1, Perez 22-1, Carlos Sainz 20-1, Hamilton 18-1, Leclerc 16-1, Norris 8-1, and Verstappen 1-4. That's all we've really got time for on this, our preview to the Las Vegas Grand Prix. We hope you all enjoy it and don't mind getting up at 6 a.m. to watch the racing action on what will be Sunday in the UK, or staying up till god-awful o'clock on Saturday night, possibly.
To be fair, if we're in the UK, it's not too bad, because we do that for Japan and Australia already.
This is true. It's not too horrid for us.
We've gotten somewhat lucky with it, and we're not as screwed over as probably every other country.
Yeah, we've certainly got the sweetest score.
The rest of mainland Europe are fine.
That's not too bad, yeah.
11 o'clock, isn't it, for them?
That is a perfect point to end on. We'll see you after the Las Vegas Grand Prix with some reviews and maybe even handing out some points for our predictions. Who knows? Best of luck if you are putting a bet on it, and obviously bet responsibly. We don't really endorse that sort of thing. And we'll see you for a review of the Las Vegas Grand Prix.